Welcome to the Experts in Sport podcast, brought to you by the School of Sport, Exercise and Health Sciences at Loughborough University. This podcast seeks to bring together the worlds of academia and professional practice. If you're interested in the latest research and trends in sport and want to hear from experts from around the world, then subscribe now, because this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Martin Foster, Applied Sport Management Lead at Loughborough University. Today we're here with strength and conditioning coaches Matt Little and Nathan Bullock. Nathan is one of our strength and conditioning coaches here at Loughborough, and Matt is the Head of Performance and Strength and Conditioning Coach for Sir Andy Murray. Today, we'll hear Matt talk about how gaining the hard skills of strength and conditioning is fairly straightforward, but in order to be successful, you really need to develop the soft skills. Matt continues to explain what those soft skills are and how to develop them over time. Finally, Matt talks about what you should be doing to become an elite strength and conditioning coach for the future. But before we hear about that, let's have a brief introduction from our two guests, starting with Nathan. Hi Matt, hi Nathan, thanks for coming. How was the walk across from the tennis centre?
Baltic and wet.
Yeah, we're in May and it was absolutely hammering it down with rain. We did find you a brolly though, Matt, so I hope you're okay on the way over.
Not much hair to protect, but that's all right.
Well, thank you very much for coming along. For our listeners to get a little bit of an understanding, we'll just have an introduction from you both. So I'm here with Matt and Nathan. So Nathan, can you just give us a brief introduction to your background in strength and conditioning?
Yeah, so I'm one of the strength and conditioning coaches here at Loughborough. I currently work with the athletics, tennis and then basketball setups. And I guess previously to that, so I started off my career working over at Man City's academy, so worked there for 4 years, then spent some time over in Canada, so worked with soccer or football over there. Came back, worked a little bit with rugby along with a few other individual sports, and then started a year December ago at Loughborough.
Brilliant, so quite a wide varied background in strength and conditioning.
Yeah. I've been fortunate enough to kind of not really work for a living and play and kind of poke people and make them run fast and all sorts of things for the sake of performance.
Nice, I like it. So what about yourself, Matt? How was your journey into where you currently are as a strength conditioning coach for Andy Murray?
Yeah, so my journey actually started here at Loughborough. In about 2001 or 2002, I started working at the LTA's academy that was based on site at the university, working with 12 to 16-year-olds who were given a place at the National Academy there. And then from there I went to work at the National Tennis Centre to work with some of our better senior players, where I met Jamie Murray and started doing some work with him on the doubles side of things. It was actually the year that he won the mixed doubles at Wimbledon, and then from there met Andy and began working with him on his team in about December of 2007. So for the last 10 years I've been working with him, and it's been a pretty incredible ride, to be honest.
That sounds like a very incredible journey that we could get into on lots of different levels regarding Andy Murray and his side. But I think today we're more going to focus on your journey and the skills and how you set things up and how your journey went into becoming an elite strength and conditioning coach. Because I think most strength and conditioning coaches' aspirations is to work at that very top elite level. You've managed to get there, so we're going to get some insight from you. And I think Nathan's got a few questions really regarding that, to frame it in that S&C world, and to see what S&C coaches can do from wherever they are right now to attain a position like yourself. So Nathan, what kind of questions have you got that we can ask Matt?
Yeah, so Matt, I guess initially we just wanted to kind of have a look at some of those kind of pillars or foundations that kind of make an S&C coach. So we kind of consider planning or programming, kind of strength diagnostics, and then coaching. Did you want to just to kind of delve into one of those and just kind of see where the conversation goes? Yeah,
definitely. The area that I'm kind of most passionate about at the moment is the coaching side of things and the skills aspect, from being a coach. I feel like a lot of the hard skills that the S&C coaches out there need are fairly easy to access now. There's lots of peer-reviewed journals, papers, clips online, and information out in the world around the types of exercises, exercise selection, program design, and so on and so forth. I think those skills are relatively easy to acquire. But the skills that I think we don't talk about enough, and that we certainly need to include a lot more in our educational processes, are more about the soft skills, the emotional intelligence, call it what you like, and I've heard it called in the past, the how to be rather than the how to do, and those are really more of the skills that I feel personally have allowed me to kind of end up working with one of our best ever athletes, but have also managed to keep me there, because I think it's one thing to attain a job like that, but it's another thing altogether to stay in that job and be successful in that role, and I think most of that is about how to be rather than the actual how to do.
It's an interesting answer. We'll touch upon bits of it in a moment. My main role here is to work with students and develop those softer skills as they're known. You get a lot of industry across the board saying that graduates aren't ready. It'd be interesting to get your take on that regarding how long it's taken you to be ready at that kind of level with those soft skills, and what we could do at this stage of university to develop those softer skills. Before we go on to the soft skills, what are those specific hard skills that you need? It's not in detail, it's in coaching qualifications, degree. Are these essential things? What would you say is essential hard skills before we move on to those?
Yeah, look, I think naturally people end up developing their philosophy over time, and there is an element of that that's based in literature and based in research, and then it's about putting those things into practice and finding out what does and doesn't work for you, and then what does and doesn't work for one athlete versus another. And I think that's just a journey that all of us as coaches just go on individually, because as we know, if we had 100 different strength coaches in a room and asked them to write a program for an athlete, you'd have 100 slightly different programs. And I think that's a great thing about our profession, is there's so much variety out there and so much to explore in terms of the content of our roles. I think that's what makes it so interesting, and as I just mentioned, what will work for one athlete, we all know that won't necessarily work for another. But I do think, making sure that you get your qualifications. For me, I did a lot of voluntary experience at the start of my career. So I travelled to Australia. I know Nathan travelled to Canada, to start to work with some athletes out there and start to. My journey was observing the coaches out there and just watching what they were doing, and just absorbing some of the information from those coaches, looking at styles, and again looking at mistakes that they might make and successes that they had. So for me, a lot of that kind of voluntary experience was a lot of my on-the-job training, and that's not just to say, I'm out there doing work experience, but actually reaching out to coaches and saying, look, I'd like to come out and watch you work. You won't notice me. I'll be in the background just watching. I won't get in the way. I won't get under your feet. I just want to come along, watch what you do, and then leave. And I think a lot of people will be more open to that. Whereas I think if they feel like someone's going to come along, be under their feet, be in the way, ask lots of questions, and kind of be super keen, which everyone is when they're at the start of their career. It's not necessarily a fault, but I think you're more likely to have people more open and to say, look, come on in, I'm happy for you to stand in the background, and perhaps if you've got one or two questions at the end of the session, that's great. But that was more my grounding rather than my formal education. It was, okay, where are the best, for me, tennis players in the world? Where can I go and just get out there and watch people work with them and learn from them? And so I just started emailing coaches in Australia to say exactly that. Look, I'm from the UK, and I'd really like to come along, but I won't be a pain. I will just come and watch. And fortunately, they said, yep, great, come along. And that's what I did. So I spent a year out there doing that. And as luck would have it, actually, one of the coaches that ended up employing me in the UK in my first job here at Loughborough was one of the coaches I went out to observe in Australia. He came over to the UK to start working. And so call it lucky or call it, I don't know, making your own luck. But that was how I got my first break, is by doing a lot of that voluntary work and showing the right attitude when I went along there. Yeah, I guess that's more my feeling, is that on the job training and grounding, especially at lower levels as well in terms of age groups, younger age groups. I think that's a really important aspect of people's careers that they need to develop before they look at starting to work at the sharp end of sport and the elite end of sport.
So we spoke about this earlier. So just for the listeners, I'm just going to mention it. We spoke about everybody comes into university, and especially now they spend a lot of money on their education, and there's almost an expectation that they can jump into these top jobs. And we discussed that actually it's probably more beneficial for them not to do that and to kind of learn their trade before they go to that top level, because they'll get found out pretty quickly at that top level. So you talked about observations. What did you learn from them observations, and what were those key soft skills that you mentioned that you've developed that have enhanced you as a coach?
Yeah, I mean, I think experienced coaches have feel, and it's a word I use a great deal in terms of feel. Is they know when to say something, they know when not to say something, they know when to be hard, they know when to go easy, and I think a lot of that does come with experience, but I do think that some of those things can be taught and learned as well. I think there are some fundamental principles of having feel around elite athletes, and so I don't think it's purely intuitive. I think that we can discuss these issues a lot. I think, as coaches, we can talk about common scenarios that might happen to a strength and conditioning coach in tennis versus a technical coach in football versus a gymnastics coach. I think there are certain scenarios that come up for all of us that actually are useful for us to discuss how we would be in those situations and how best to hold ourselves so that you end up getting the right result for the athlete that you're working with. And so I just think that it's a conversation worth having and worth kind of continuing.
So within this kind of almost informed or deliberate observation, are there any kind of key tactics or tools that you, I guess, have transitioned from when you first were working kind of with those 12 to 17-year-olds in terms of your role now? Like, has that transitioned, has that changed, or have you just become more aware of the type of things that you do observe and how you then kind of implement change?
Yeah, I mean, so many of the situations that would happen with the teenage athletes that were here, so many of my experiences that were involved in working with those guys and girls for several years have helped me shape the coach that I am today. And just because they were younger athletes, it doesn't necessarily mean that it won't transfer to working with older athletes. And so just things like, sitting down and having a difficult conversation with one of their parents has helped me learn about how to have difficult conversations with all kinds of people in the industry. My experience with the coaches that were working here, they were very, very high-level coaches, very experienced coaches. And we were talking earlier, Nathan and I was saying that one of my first days on the job here, I walked into a meeting with those coaches thinking I knew everything about the job, and kind of just threw an off-the-hand comment at the start of the meeting, and the head coach at the centre absolutely tore into me, and it was pretty much one of my first days on the job, and I couldn't believe it. I was completely and utterly shell-shocked by this happening to me, because it had never happened to me before. But that was kind of like, for me, day one of my coaching career. Everything I'd learned at university and all of the things I'd studied went straight out of the window, and it was actually, okay, I need to learn how to be around these people, and I need to learn how to speak, what language to use, and that stayed with me forever, and I'm grateful that happened to me, because if it didn't, I would have continued to walk around thinking, I know what I'm doing, I know I've got this thing all sorted, I know how to do everything in this job, and so that was really just a great experience for me to say, right, you go back home that night, you look yourself in the mirror and think, okay, well, what do I know? And it's time to start listening and stop assuming that I've got all the answers, because especially at that time of my career, I didn't realise how few answers I had.
I think it's one of those, a lot of students sometimes they graduate, they think they know a lot or they know everything, and once you start to learn more, you then start to realise how much you actually don't know.
Yes.
And I think that's an interesting journey to go on in terms of self-discovery and realising you don't know everything, and practising where to improve and where those areas are. So as a young coach, what were the things that you thought, actually, this is what I need to learn?
Well, I got given the choice. I was lucky. I interviewed for the LTA job, and there was 2 academies opening at the time, and I was fortunate enough to get the choice between going to Bath or Loughborough. And the coaches at Bath had a reputation for being far more supportive and integrative, and the coaches at Loughborough were actually the tennis coaches at Loughborough at the time were actually more edgy, and I knew that coming here would have perhaps been a more difficult journey for me, but I chose here because I knew that it would challenge me, and I knew that they would challenge me more. Not to say the coaches at Bath wouldn't, but the coaches up here would challenge me a lot more to get out of my comfort zone, and I think that's something that people must seek out, especially in the early stages of their career. Everybody needs that senior person to put their hat on straight when they forget themselves a little bit, and that's definitely not to think about the culture, a bullying culture or a culture where you're afraid to go into work. That's certainly not what I'm talking about. But what I'm talking about is making sure that you check yourself before you throw out statements, and being around experienced people who've been at the cutting edge of sport, and who won't allow you to get away with loose comments, because again, we talked about skills that transfer to working with the best elite level athletes. They certainly won't let you get away with loose-lipped comments, and often is the case that especially if you haven't built a rapport with them yet, one loose comment too many, and you won't be working with them again, because they will simply choose not to have you around. So again, making those mistakes in an early phase of your career, learning that quickly, and then kind of checking yourself and say, okay, I need to think about things before I speak. I need to practice the pause, as I've seen online a few times. Before you leap in and make a comment, is think about okay, I'm just going to leave that comment for now. And I think they're these little skills that life teaches you, but they're so valuable.
Have you got an example? It can be real or hypothetical of where you have been loose-lipped, or you have said something and then thought, why did I say that?
I mean, literally every single day being around someone like Andy, every single conversation you have, there's a potential for you to drop a comment in there, and you might not even be talking about tennis. You could be talking about the football that happened the night before. You could be talking about anything. You could be talking about politics or horse racing. It could be anything. You've got to think about what you're saying. You've got to be accurate in your statements, because you're going to get asked the question if you're not accurate. So you either need to be very confident it's true, you need to have some facts to back up what you're saying, or you need to be able to put your hands up and say, do you know what? Yeah, okay, you're right. I actually got that one wrong. And that's also another skill that I learned here, was the ability, because I see this so often in younger coaches, that they don't want to admit when they're wrong or when they've made a mistake, because they think they're going to get judged, because they're a little insecure about being inexperienced as it is. So they'll make a mistake and they'll either try and cover it or just deny it. And experienced coaches can see they've made that mistake a mile off, because they've probably made it 1,000 times as a young coach as well. So actually the ability to just hold your hands up and say, do you know what? Yeah, I got that one wrong. I got that call wrong. I think is a really overlooked skill. It takes guts to say you were wrong. And some of these things are cliches, but it really is true. And I still see it all the time. You see a younger coach make a mistake with an athlete, make a mistake in a session, not in terms of their content again, but in terms of how they dealt with the situation, walk away and blame the athlete or blame the other coach or blame the parent in the room. And I'm watching it thinking, you know what, you need to hold your hands up there, because that was actually you that caused that issue. These conversations happen on a daily basis, and
you'll get more respect from holding those hands up and saying, do you know what, I'm wrong, and it shows maturity.
Yeah, I mean, that won't be an obvious respect. The people that are around you won't say, oh, well done for putting your hands up there. They won't. But the opposite is, if you don't, that will eat away at your credibility as a coach, and that is a subtle thing, but people will make a subconscious mental note of that, and that will eat away at your credibility. So like I say, no one's going to pat you on the back for admitting you were wrong or for admitting you made a mistake, but they certainly will hold it against you if you don't. And it actually feels pretty good to do that as well. It feels like a bit of a weight off your shoulders if you've made a mistake or you've made an inaccurate statement, you've thrown a comment out there like, let's talk about, I don't know, if we're talking about tennis and someone might say, oh, that guy's rubbish now. He used to be great, but that guy's rubbish now. If you say that to someone like an Andy, who himself is a top level performer, and I'm just a fitness trainer and I can play tennis, but I'm compared to the likes of Andy, I'm absolutely useless. Who would I be to criticise another professional tennis player? And so he'd be quite right to say, well, hang on a minute, okay, that guy may have lost a few matches this year, but he's still a pretty good player, and so it's comments like that, little comments like that, and then for me to turn around and say, no, that guy's rubbish, and back my comment up would be a mistake. What I need to say in that situation is, you know what, yeah, you're right, he is a pretty good player actually. Yeah, you're right there.
Yeah, it's pretty quick to right that small wrong, but it can have bigger,
Yeah, because if you say no, I'm right, that conversation will rumble on. And in 2 or 3 weeks' time, that'll come up again, and he might even play that guy in a month's time. And now all of a sudden, a month ago, I've just put some pressure on him to be beating that guy because he thinks I think that guy's rubbish. And so the effects of these comments, you've got to be careful in your language in the conversations that you're having around elite coaches, elite athletes parents. You've got to check your communication.
And do you consciously plan for that? As in whatever context or environment you're in, are you very conscious beforehand of the kind of language you should be using and how you do it? Or is it something that comes naturally, or has that evolved?
It's definitely evolved, but I think it is that feel aspect to it. There are things, and we'll probably come on later to talking about some of the things that I do in preparing for certain situations that I know are coming up. But there's definitely an aspect where you will feel a conversation. It's a gut feeling. Call it empathy. Call it gut instinct. Whatever you will call it. That you will know that this conversation is loaded. The conversation. There's consequences to this conversation. You could be talking about your own fitness training, and someone like Andy will say, oh, did you go to the gym today or whatever? If I just kind of threw out I've been doing a bit of running lately, I might run a marathon next year. Could be just an offhand comment. Oh, you're going to run the marathon, are you? Okay, well, what sort of time do you think you get in the marathon? Okay, all right, what are you going to do to prepare? Straight away, you're in this world of you've committed to running the marathon, and now all of a sudden you're on this journey, which it was just a loose comment. Well, maybe, so you've got to feel these conversations out, and it does come with experience.
That's a great example, because you're holding athletes to accountability. You put that out there, they're going to give it back to you.
100%. All the time these things happen. Even when you're coaching an athlete and saying, look, I think you could just get your leg a little straighter in that position. Oh, okay, well, show me. And it's not to humiliate you. That's not coming from a place of nastiness, or the athlete's not coming from a place of nastiness. But what they're saying is, you're criticising me. How are you with a little bit of criticism? I can stand there and watch you do that exercise, and I could pick holes in your technique potentially. And I think a lot of coaches are a bit uncomfortable when someone turns the tables on them and questions them about whatever it may be. I think that's a thing that coaches aren't used to, especially I'm working with junior athletes for years. You kind of, and again, I was younger then. If a junior athlete challenges you on something, you think, well, who's this teenager to be asking me about this? Who do you think you are? But actually, being big enough to answer that in the right way and confidently, I think can be a real teachable moment and build a rapport with that player. It's very easy to turn around and say, well, I'm an adult, you're a kid, how dare you? but that, I don't think that's a very positive way to handle that situation.
But I think that's a great example of kind of how you've seen a potential negative as an opportunity, in terms of almost kind of seeing that kickback response from that athlete, and then turning it around and going, well, hold on, actually here's an opportunity to educate, to empower, to kind of almost create a little bit more buy-in without them actually realising it. And at the end of the day, them thinking that they're in a better position because of, oh, well, hold on, I've just questioned the coach and actually he's just answered me and directed me in the direction that he wanted me to go anyway. So I think I think for me that's a great example of kind of those soft skills for the students to kind of use every kind of almost opportunity possible just to try and manipulate the outcome that you want to try and achieve from there. I think for me there's loads of kind of tools that you can use and implement straight away. Is it worth kind of delving into the realms of kind of psychology in terms of how you look to implement and integrate some of those tools? You know, is it a kind of within your setup that you have currently, is it a couch psychology session? Is it kind of the realms that it tries to manipulate and dictate kind of every aspect of it? How does psychology affect your coaching and your coaching practices?
Yeah, I mean, again, these are all fairly informal skills, I think, and anyone who's worked with athletes closely knows that you are a friend, a counsellor, a parent to them, and again, there's very little training that's actually prepared you for that situation. I remember working with some of the teenagers here. One of the older teenagers admitted to me, she said, someone brought some alcohol into our accommodation the other night, and actually I tried some, I had some, and I had a very good rapport with this player, so she was confiding in me that she tried some alcohol, and nothing bad had happened. There was no kind of fallout from it. And I went and spoke to my colleagues and just said, oh, look, she confided that in me there. And my colleague said, Matt, you've got to tell her parents. You've got to go tell her parents, because if they find out that you knew and you kept that to yourself, there's some consequences to this. And I felt absolutely awful, because I said I had to go and say, look, I'm really sorry, and I appreciate the fact that you've trusted me to confide in me, but my role here is a professional role, and what you have done is actually wrong. And even though I'll support you through this, we're going to have to face this, and we're going to have to talk to your parents and let them know that this has happened. And the girl was punished, and we moved on, and it actually didn't affect my rapport with her. But that was a really tricky situation where, they kind of digressed a little bit, but the kind of the psychological aspects and your role as a mentor, as a parent, as a coach, that there's no formal education for that stuff in terms of in terms of becoming a strength and conditioning coach, but it's such a huge part of your role, and I keep coming back to this, that it really isn't about the exercises you pick, whether you're successful in these jobs, but to answer the question, I think it is a far more informal aspect of the work and feeling your way through situations.
And I guess would you, and I know we alluded to it earlier in terms of your time with the LTA within that kind of 12 to 17-year-old age bracket, would you say that almost in the trenches in that environment, that was your kind of upskilling of that environment? And I guess kind of as a caveat to that, would you then have a recommendation to kind of young aspiring, if somebody wants to be the next you, kind of how would you look to kind of implement them to get to that point? And kind of what things would you want them to do to achieve that?
I mean, I get asked all the time, how do I work with an Andy Murray? And my first answer is, don't work with an Andy Murray straight away. Go work with a bunch of kids. Go work with some really good young kids who are great athletes. Go and work with some ones that aren't so great. Go and work with different populations. Get yourself in a gym and just work with adults. Work with people who've got injuries, people who've come back from a heart attack. Get a real broad base of experience. Don't think you're too good for those environments, because believe me, that those skills will ground your confidence, they'll ground your ability to react on your feet to different situations, will hone your communication skills, your how to be. The broader your level of experience at the start, and the time to do that stuff is right at the very start when you're heading out into the world of work. And be confident in the knowledge that doing that is actually helping you for when you get the job that you at that time perceive the job that you really want. Know that that's not time wasted. Because like I say, on the professional tennis tour, a lot of the tennis players employ graduates because they're quite cheap to pay and they're willing to travel because they're quite young. So you see some very young practitioners on the road with some very good players, and those graduates are getting chewed up and spat out by these elite athletes in terms of, they're running around. They've got them wrapped around their little finger. The athlete's got the practitioner wrapped around their little finger because they just don't have that level of experience where they know where certain lines are drawn. They know what issues to get into, what issues to leave well alone, and they kind of, a lot of them just want to be liked by the player because they feel that that's their currency in the job, and it is a large part of their currency in the job. But again, it's having that feel for the balance, and like I say, that if you don't have that level of experience before you hit that job, you're going to get found out quickly, and you might not lose the job, but I don't think you're going to be very successful or feel respected in it. And there's a big part to that. So every graduate, to be honest, in any of their disciplines, doesn't have to be strength and conditioning, could be physio, could be art and design, whatever it is actually go out and spend years cutting your teeth and finding out what works, make your mistakes, and feel happy that you're doing that. Don't think, oh no, I'm working, these tennis players or these football players that I'm working with are rubbish. This wasn't what I studied for years for. I thought I was going to be, helping out players in Champions League finals. This isn't what I envisioned for myself. Well, the only way I believe to get to working with players who play Champions League finals is to do your years in the trenches, is to cut your teeth on lots and lots and lots of athletes before you get there.
I think you're totally right. Very short story of mine. I got into S&C 2003 when I graduated, professional football club. Very quickly realised I didn't like it. Thought that's what I wanted to do, and I got out of it within 6 months. I actually preferred personal training, which most strength conditioning coaches I think find madness. But I didn't know that because I had not gone and done experience whilst I was at university. And I did go and cut my teeth in gyms and all the rest of it and develop that way, and went on a different journey eventually. But I think that's a big story for graduates and people wanting to progress, is find out what you actually love, not what you think you love. And you only get that from the experience, because just as an example, give me a day in the life of a strength and conditioning coach at the elite level, the reality.
I mean, it's a sort of daily treadmill, really. And don't get me wrong, of course I love what I do, but it's a fairly repetitive daily treadmill of kind of making sure you get in, you prepare for the warm-up, you're in there for the physio session, you're chatting to the physio, then it's the physical warm-up, then you're out there for the technical session, which could be 2, 3, 4 hours of observing that session. Then it's a quick bite to eat, and then you're in the gym, with your physical session and the cool down of the day, and then you wake up the next day and do exactly the same thing. You're traveling the world, but essentially you're seeing a hotel room, a gym and a tennis court, and then back to a hotel room. And there's a great deal of sacrifice, and I was talking about this with Nathan on the way over, that if you're going to succeed in sport, and probably in most other industries, you need to go to where the athletes are. So it doesn't matter where you're from, you need to go to where the athletes are. You're going to sacrifice a great deal of time with your family and friends. You're probably going to not feel like you actually have roots anywhere, because you'll be traveling a great deal, and so your home is where you end up working. And so you sacrifice personal relationships, and family occasions, all of those things that, I was talking to some coaches the other day, and they were saying, well, it's bank holiday weekend, and they were like, what's a bank holiday weekend? We don't recognise that in sport. You don't knock off early on a Friday and rock back in on the Tuesday. That doesn't exist in sport. You rest when the athlete's resting, and so it's a fantastic job when you have some success, but be mindful of the fact that if you're going to get there, you're going to sacrifice a heck of a lot. You're going to find yourself on your own a heck of a lot, and that's not to paint a glum picture. That's just a reality of the job, and most athletes lose more than they win. So you're going to be around, them when they're down in the dumps a lot. Elite athletes panic a lot when they lose. They look to blame a lot when they lose. It's never their fault. It's something else or someone else that's caused the issue. You've got to have thick skin. If you're working with an athlete who's high profile enough, there's also the media, there's agents, there's parents, family, friends to deal with, there's other experts that are better than you at what you do. There's a whole realm of political issues around that person as well. So it makes it a fascinating job, and every day is different in some respects too, but the glamorous side of things is, and what people see on the TV is such a small aspect of the day in, day out, that it's, you've got to be aware of what you're getting yourself into, that's for sure.
I like that you've painted a picture of the reality, and it sounded massively negative from me listening.
Yeah.
He is smiling, so, I know he does like his job.
I love it. I love what I do. But like I say, it's just to make people aware that there's another aspect to it.
I think it's totally needed. I know we're running out of time a little bit, so I'm going to leave Nathan with a final question for you before we wrap things up. Okay. So Nathan, what you got?
Yeah, so I guess it was kind of in line with, if you were to kind of look to give some advice to yourself 10 years ago, kind of what would be some of the big take homes that you'd look to try and influence or change based on what you know now, that hopefully we can steal to take your job?
Yeah, great. Great question. People often say be yourself, and it sounds like a cliche, but when I look back at the 10 years, I have been myself, because it's tough to put on an act for that long, but athletes and other elite people in that environment will sniff out if you're not being yourself. So I think that's number one. I think connections with people are really important. So, building a connection with the coach that you're working with and with the athlete you're working with is important. So prioritizing spending time with that person is massively important, rather than just sitting in the gym and waiting for the athlete and sending them out to the court or wherever it is. Go out on the court with them, watch the session, ask questions, become a part of every environment that they operate in. Communicate well, listen, and that's a really underrated skill. So often you can find yourself talking, and maybe perhaps I'm just a boring person, but often you can be talking to someone and you can see that they've switched off and they're thinking about their own answer to what you initially started saying, and I think listening to people is a really tricky thing. I think actually if you just put more effort into doing that, I think you'll be successful. But so I think communicating appropriately, creating a connection with people is really important in our role.
Matt, Nathan, thank you very much for your time. You've given us some fascinating insights into the career of a strength and conditioning coach, the hard skills, but more importantly the soft skills that I think lots of people, not just strength and conditioning coaches, can take away from what you just said. So really appreciate it. Really appreciate your time. Thanks a lot. I hope our journey back over in the rain is nice, and hopefully we can meet again and we can do something else on another topic in the future. But thanks to both of you.
You're welcome.
We've heard Matt explain the importance of the soft skills of coaching, why they're important, and how to develop them. In future podcasts, we'll look to hear more about some of the hard skills of strength and conditioning and give some practical insights of how you can develop better athletes. If you want to get in touch and let us know any subject areas or experts that you'd be keen to listen to, then contact me, Martin Foster, on m.foster@loughborough.ac.uk or tweet me at martinfoster82. Bye for now, we'll see you next time.